Bismillahi walhamdulillah wassalatu wassalam ala rasulillah. Sorry for all the noise. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wahlul 'uqdatan min lisani yafqahu qawli. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and peace be upon you all. I'm really happy to be here with you all. Thank you for having me. Nashville is really beautiful, mashallah. It's my first time here. So this topic on navigating, collective trauma, mentally and emotionally, is obviously very timely and very, specific reason why we chose it, because trauma is not just individual, it's also collective. Meaning that as we're watching video after video after video, we are consumed, we are, exposed to this trauma on a certain level. Obviously not in the same capacity as the people of Gaza, but we are exposed to it on a certain level. And sometimes I even wonder, I talk a lot about how our mind is not designed to be exposed to this much online. Our brain is not designed to be exposed to 5 videos in the span of 1 minute of the most horrific images. And what that does to us is that those images get stored in the mind. And not to say, and I'm not discouraging anyone from being on social media to post or share and bring awareness, but I just want to speak about, if you are feeling heavy-hearted, if you're feeling weighed down, if you're feeling fatigued, if you're feeling burnt out, if you're just not okay, that's natural, given what we're exposed to right now, right? Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said that the ummah is like one body. And so if one part of our body hurts, the rest of the ummah hurts. And so of course there's collective trauma, because this hadith actually reflects that when one part of our ummah is hurting, we are gonna feel it. Because that is actually the difference between empathy and sympathy. They say sympathy is when you look at someone's struggle and you feel sorry that they're going through that. Empathy is you look at someone's struggle and you know that there's no difference between you and him, and it's only by the grace of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that you are not in their position. That's the difference between empathy and sympathy. So empathy is a higher level of connection to our collective and to other people, to humanity, to the hearts of others. And this is exactly what Islam teaches. So if you're hurting when you see your brothers and sisters hurt, that is empathy, that is human, that is natural. But how do we take care of ourselves during this time? And I'm not saying this from this Western ideology of, that self-care is more important than caring for Palestine right now. Because, part of my work, I've spent years filtering, part of my work in Islamic psychology has been spending extensive time looking at the Western self-help world and filtering that through an Islamic framework. And that was one of the biggest issues that I had with the Western framework of psychology and self-help and, personal development and all of that. It's focus on you, forget others, you do you, and disconnect. So it's interesting because a lot of the rhetoric and the messages we receive in the self-help world, I find that a lot of times what it does is that it disconnects people from humanity. And this is due to postmodernism, it's due to secularism. There's a lot of movements that promoted this, right? That promoted us separating from one another. And you see this in our world today. There's a saying that says, when God gives you more, do not build higher fences, build longer tables. In our world today, we do the opposite, especially in the West. We get more comfortable, our fences get higher, and our tables get smaller or shorter. Or they're very big and they just have a lot of empty chairs, right? And this is what's happening in our world today. People are obsessed with me, myself, and I. And so when I say, how do we take care of ourselves during this time, I'm not looking at it through that framework of nafsi. I'm not looking at it through that framework of what is going to make me feel good. I'm looking at it through the framework of how did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and his messenger teach us to care for ourselves during the hardest of times. Because this obsession with the individual is actually the problem that we have in our Muslim Ummah today. When we look at, for example, what's happening in Palestine, and many people will say, I can't believe that Palestine is in the middle of all of these Muslim countries and no one's helping them. And they get angry, they get really upset. And so what I always say to that is, look at how we are doing it on an individual level. Whatever is happening in the macro happens on the micro. Whatever is happening in the collective is happening on an individual level. And this is reflective of the ayah in the Quran where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, لا يغير قوم حتى يغيروا الناس بأنفسهم, right? That Allah does not change the condition of a people until they change what is in themselves. Allah taught us that there is a connection between the individual condition, how you take care of yourself, the state of your heart, and the collective condition. So never look at the state of Palestine right now and think, oh, it's just because the Muslim countries around it are not helping it. That happens in our communities too. A person could literally be struggling in front of everyone, and they could literally be asking for help, and everyone is so consumed with their own lives that they don't help the person that's in their community. So when you see what's happening in Palestine, it's horrific and it's horrible that no one's helping them, but it shouldn't surprise us. Because whatever is happening on the micro level, on the smaller scale, happens on the larger scale. And this empowers us. This should empower us. This should empower us to say, wow, how I take care of myself, how I take care of my heart, how I rectify my own individual condition actually makes a difference in our collective condition. And this is what this whole situation in Palestine is waking us up to. And I hope that's what it's doing. How are you going to fix you? Because you exist in a space, and if your condition is rectified, that space becomes better. If two people fix their condition, then that space becomes even better. So never underestimate the power of one person aligning themselves with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. One person focusing on how they can rectify their inner world, their inner condition, purify their heart, align it with Allah's truths, because it directly impacts the collective. So when we talk about caring for ourselves during this time, I don't want us to go back to me, myself, and I, my comfort, what feels good. No, if you're feeling heavy-hearted right now because of what you're seeing, that's okay. This is not wrong. Over the last, because this genocide has been happening for over a month now, so many people have spoken to me about, oh, I feel so down, and I say, that's okay. Why is that not okay? When we talk about navigating collective trauma or individual trauma, mentally and emotionally, one of the biggest problems why we don't navigate difficulty well is because we're not okay with not being okay. We as a society in the West have programmed us to always want to feel good. And if you feel anything other than good, there's something wrong. This is what I see when I work with people who have anxiety, for example. We label all anxiety as bad, but not all anxiety is bad. Sometimes anxiety and stress in the psychology world, this is why it's important to get your information from people who are trained, not from the social media, because social media teaches you the opposite. You feel bad, go to a spa. You feel anxious, oh, that means something is wrong. No, not all anxiety is bad. Not all stress is bad. Even shame, not all shame is bad. So anxiety and stress propels you to move forward. But if every time you're programmed that I have to always feel good, and the second you don't feel good, you have to go and make yourself feel good, or you have to escape the pain, you will never grow. You will be stuck emotionally and mentally for years. And I see this. And this is what this society is programming us to do, and that's what it wants. It wants people obsessed with themselves. It wants people just focusing on their own problems. It wants people escaping anything other than feeling good. And this is why tazkiyah is so powerful, because in Islam teaches us it's all centered around freeing the heart from the shackles of the nafs, purifying this heart. So Islam doesn't teach us that you always have to feel good. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in the Quran, you may dislike a thing, you may dislike something, but it is good for you. Well, it's good for you, right? And the opposite. So we're not taught to define the value of something by how we feel. We're taught to define the value of something through Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Is this good for my soul? Is this good for my relationship with Allah? Is this good for my akhirah? And so we are trained to say no to our nafs through Islam. We're taught to say no to our nafs. That if I don't feel good, if I'm not always comfortable, that's okay. And discomfort is where people grow. You never grow when you're always comfortable. You know, Helen Keller, she's, the famous story of the girl who was blind. She grew up and she navigated being blind her whole life. And she says there's things that I'm paraphrasing, it's not the exact quote in front of me, but I remember reading a reflection of hers that said that she can only grow during times of difficulty. That there's times that difficult times offer you an opportunity to grow that times of ease never offer you. This is why Allah tests those whom He loves. Because if He is testing you, then He is giving you. If He is testing you, then He's giving you an opportunity to grow. And He could leave you to not grow. He could leave you to just focus on yourself. Here, you want the dunya, take it. But no, I love my abd. I want him to grow. I want her to grow. So let me test her. Let me see let me show her potential. People have a hard time with that. I'll do questions after, inshallah.
I just wanted to know what nafs means.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Okay.
No, thank you for actually asking me to clarify that. Nafs is, in Islam we say, sometimes scholars will say the nafs to the entire self, but when I'm speaking to it, and when majority of scholars speak to it, it's usually the lower self, the part of us that is pleasure seeking, the part of us that is constantly chasing instant gratification, that ego containing part of ourselves. Thank you for asking. So it's that part of us that is not driven it doesn't care about the akhirah, doesn't care about truth. It's the part of us that stays in this dunya, right? That is for this dunya, but we're supposed to learn how to put it in its place. We're not meant to lead from there. And if you choose to lead from there, you're choosing to always feel good. You're choosing that I am choosing what feels good over what I need. I'm choosing what I want over what is good for me. And so part of navigating what we're seeing in this world is asking ourselves the hard questions. What do I need to change within my own life? What do I need to wake up? Have I been on cruise control? Have I just been going through the motions? In the West, we're more comfortable than the people of Palestine. But yet, our comfort brings with it its own problems. People sometimes, and this is part of navigating collective trauma, is that you don't put value on what is good or what is bad when you look at the lives of others. What I mean by that is, of course, I'm not talking about the genocide. We want the genocide to end. We want them to be free. We want their oppression to end. But I'm saying a lot of times we look at people's struggles, or we look at people living in different parts of the world who don't have access to a lot of the things that maybe we have access to. And we think, we're better off. Or we think, oh my gosh, this is a question I had as a young adult. I remember in my undergrad, I would always grapple with this question. Why am I here? And I wrote this in my personal statement to college applications at 17. I was thinking about this because it was post 9/11 world. But I was kind of you start awakening to all of these things that are happening in the world, and you start to hear about horror happening in other parts of the world. And I was like, why am I here comfortable and other people living a different reality. And I remember when I started, studying Islam more, I asked my teacher this one time, and I said, and it was actually, subhanAllah, a time after a class, our study circle, where we were talking about something that had just happened in Palestine. This is like, over 10 years ago. And so just to show you this, whatever's happening in Palestine is not something new or recent. But I remember feeling so overwhelmed by what was happening. And at that time, I had just finished reading a book called 5 Years of My Life. And this book shook me. Like, I think it was almost like I had vicarious trauma through this book, because it was the first time as, let's say, an 18 or 19-year-old, I was exposed to how horrible the world could really be. And it was about a young kid who was falsely accused and taken to Guantanamo at 16 or 17 years old. And I couldn't believe what he went through. And I couldn't put this book down. I kept reading, and I finished it that week. I finished it in like a couple days. And after that book, I became so, and I'm already like highly like sensitive, very empath, like I feel things very deeply. And I felt this book, I just couldn't stop feeling it. And I would just cry. I couldn't believe that someone went through something like this. I couldn't believe that evil exists to this level. I couldn't believe that horror exists like this. And then afterwards, something happened in Palestine, and that was like, that's it. I broke down. I started crying. And I couldn't. Afterwards, I asked my teacher, I said, how can I go on living my life here and just enjoy, how can I enjoy my blessings? I didn't know how to do that. Given that what I'm hearing, I felt so guilty. And he said something that always stayed with me. He said, how do you know that they are better off, that you are better off than them? They are better off than us. And what Allah does, like basically, like they have better hearts than us. And we see this now when we're witnessing what's happening in Palestine, right? We see this. How is a father able to see his son dead and just immediately say, Alhamdulillah? Or say the Shahada, or remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Or rejoice that their child is a shaheed. By the way, that doesn't come easy. That only comes to people who have been living by that truth. Because during your hardest time, and we know this, I know this from my work in holding space for people during their most difficult of times. In your most difficult of times, that's when truth comes up so powerfully. You can only hold on to truth during your most challenging of times. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us the example in the Quran of the people on the ship, and where like the waves start coming in. He shows us this scene of people in trouble, people who don't believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But what do? They ask Allah for help. Because truth becomes so clear in the hardest of times, and you can't hold on to falsehood during times of difficulty. You could hold on to falsehood during times of ease. This is why Allah tests us. What's really true? What is really your truth? What do you really believe? It's easy to claim something when things are easy. But whatever is false won't be able to help you during times of difficulty. So whatever you're anchored in is going to be your anchoring during times of difficulty. Whatever you lived by is going to be what comes up during times of difficulty. This is why the shahada doesn't come to anyone, right? In their last moments. It only comes to someone who has lived, who was actually a shaheed. What is a shaheed? A witnesser to truth. So it's not going to come to anyone. It's not going to, just because you want to say it before you end, you're not going to be, before you meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you're not going to be able to say it unless it was a truth you lived by. So what does that teach us? Death, there's nothing more difficult than death. There's nothing more difficult than those last moments when you're about to meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's why only truth will help you in those moments. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make the last of our deeds the best of our deeds. Allahumma jal khayra a'malina khawatimiha. Right? And allow us to be of those who meet Allah upon truth, witnessers of truth. But whatever is your anchoring, that's what's going to help you during times of difficulty. So don't be surprised as we're going through all of this collectively, that Allah's showing you truths about yourself. And He's showing you truths about them. I have many friends. I haven't visited Palestine, but I know many people who have, and they always come back and they say, this is way before this whole thing happened, but they would always say, these are the best of people. They would come back and just rave about the people. You know, when people go to certain places, they usually rave about like what they saw, what they did, right? People always come back from Palestine and rave about the people and talk about how amazing these people are. One of my friends, she visited and she was in Masjid al-Aqsa, and this woman who had to go through an elderly woman had to go through several checkpoints to come to pray in the masjid. Whereas my friend was, staying around, so it wasn't that hard for her. And obviously they treat her differently than they treat this elderly woman. They get so happy to see Muslims coming to visit them. Do you know that? They get so happy and they say, please come visit us. They rejoice when they feel that we are connected to them. So she was so happy to find out that my friend came with her family and she was with her daughter. And once she found out that, she came from overseas to come visit them, she opened her bag and proceeded to take everything out of her bag, like food-wise, to give to my friend, who wasn't living very far from the masjid. She wasn't staying very far. And my friend was like, no, I can't, please, I can't. And she insisted. She took everything and gave it to her. This is a woman who might get hungry on the way back. This is a woman who might need what she was giving to her. But this is the state of their hearts. They might have less, but their hearts give more. We have more, but our hearts give less. And this is a problem. So don't ever look to them and think, oh my gosh, we're better off. No, we're not. We're not. The more comfortable we are, the more we will struggle. This is something I highlight in my book, inshallah, and I'm not going to go into too much detail, but one of the things I mention is, the skyrocketing rates of mental health disorders in the US and in the West. We have some of the highest mental health disorders, highest depression rates, highest anxiety rates. But yet we're the most comfortable. Access to everything, right? And of course, I know that not everyone, comfort varies, right? But I'm just comparing it in comparison to other countries, poorer countries, countries that are living in war, countries that are, are deprived. So this is a time to challenge ourselves, to get uncomfortable, to assess what are my beliefs, what are my truths, what have I been living by, what is my anchor? Is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala my anchor, or am I the Lord of myself? Another thing that the Western world teaches us, you're the master of yourself, you're the Lord of yourself. Well, they don't say that, but I interpret it that way. But no, we are not the Lord of ourselves. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is our Lord. He is our creator. And if you submit to anything else, you will always suffer mentally and emotionally. So the way that we are trained as Muslims, or the way that Islam teaches us to look at things like this, is to always ask the right questions. What is Allah teaching me? Not just what is Allah teaching the world, but what is Allah teaching me, my own heart? What are the truths I need to reignite my connection to? Am I anchored in the Quran? Because what you see in the world happening now, you can find it in the Quran. The story of Musa alayhi salam, several stories. In the story of the people of the ditch in the Quran, the oppression. There's so many stories of oppression in the Quran where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about, what happens to the oppressor. What happens to those who are trying to help the oppressor see the truth, Musa and Pharaoh. So this is a time to say, I need to take inventory of my life. What are my beliefs about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? What are my beliefs about myself and my path in this world? But also, am I looking at this struggle through just a dunya lens, or am I looking at it through an akhirah lens as well? Am I looking at this struggle with just the dunya being my only reality, or am I looking at it knowing that I see the bigger picture? That their lives do not end here, that they are alive in a world that is real and true, and only a veil keeps us from seeing them. I'm sure you guys have heard this story, but I've been sharing it just to give hope. But it went viral, and it was a story of a woman who saw her son running towards her in Palestine. And as he was running towards her, he got hit and he died. And she was explaining that in that moment, of course, the scene is, I can't imagine. But she said, أَنَا احْتَسَبْتَهَا عَنْدَ اللَّهِ, like I accounted for it with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And I said, إِنَّ لِلَّهِ وَإِنَّ إِلَيْهِ رَاجِعُونَ. Verily to Allah we belong, and to Him we shall return. She said, but as a mother, what I worried about is, did he feel pain? That night, she had a dream where she saw her son, and she asked him what happened. He said, I don't know, Mama. 1 minute, I am running towards you in this earth, and the next minute, I found myself running in Jannah. Yeah. Allah is giving us signs. This is not just for her. There's a reason why her story went viral. So it's a message for our hearts too, that what Allah has taught us in the Quran is a reality. He tells us in the Quran, Allah teaches us that the shaheed is not dead. Do not think that they are dead. They are alive. 1 second, I am running on towards you, Mama, and the next I am running in Jannah. She asked him, did you feel pain? He said, I didn't feel more than a pinch. This is reflective of the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, where he tells us the martyr does not feel more than a pinch. So you see a reality, but behind the veil is a completely different reality. But if you only look through a dunya lens, you will always suffer mentally, emotionally, spiritually, on all levels. You will always suffer. We are not designed to look through just the dunya lens, because this dunya compared to the akhirah is like a drop in an ocean. And if Allah showed you the ocean, you would not be concerned about what happens in that drop. You would not be concerned. You would say, give me the ocean. And when people enter paradise and they're asked about the struggles of this dunya, they are going to be like, what struggles? The second you put your foot in Jannah, you won't care about all the hardships that you go through in this world. You know that the martyr is the only one who's going to ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to keep bringing him back to this world, so that he can die again and again and again and get the reward that Allah has given him again and again. Only the martyr. You know, others are not going to ask Allah to bring them back. They're done with this dunya, right? But the martyr, seeing the reward that Allah has in store for them, is going to ask Allah to please bring me back so that I can die again, so that I can see, so I can get what you have prepared for me. But you need to have your own individual connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His words and His promises. You need to have those moments where you sit with the ayat of Jannah and you reflect on them and you let them become a visual in your heart and your mind. Not just, oh, I know Jannah exists, yes, Jannah is our greatest goal. No, have a deep connection to Jannah. Have a deep connection and relationship with this, where you're headed, the ocean, not the drop. Do you not think that's going to impact you mentally and emotionally? You know, as a psychologist, we're trained to look at mental health through a multifactorial lens. What that means is that when we look at an issue, we say that, oh, it might be genetics plays a role, we say that behavior plays a role, environment plays a role, but what the West never takes into account is, where's spirituality? Do you not think that if you started changing the lens in which you view your struggles, and started expanding your vision, where you don't just see the dunya, but you see the akhirah, where you don't just see the pain, but you see the reward that that pain has for you, where you don't just see the struggle, but you see Allah's closeness and what He has in store for you, do you not think that that's going to help you mentally and emotionally? It absolutely will. In existential psychology, it's a branch of psychology that approaches problems through that lens of existence, meaning it looks at things in relation to our existence in life. Purpose, why are we here? And it says that the more we come to terms with the fact that our life is temporary, the less anxiety we feel. This is not a Muslim philosophy. This is just a different approach. So existential psychology says that the more that a person comes to terms with the fact that their life is temporary, that they're not living forever, they actually become more awakened. They feel less anxious. Why? Because they start caring about what actually matters. And in doing so, what doesn't matter starts to filter out. And they give the example of people, for example, who get the news that they're going to die. Chronic illness or something like that, right? A life-threatening illness. They say something amazing happens to them. Their vision becomes sharper. Not physical vision, like their vision in life. They start to say, what have I been doing? What's been going on? Why have I been living like this? I need to maximize now. And this is what Islam teaches us. It is the religion of being in the moment, in the present, maximizing the day that God has given you. And we saw this in the companions. They would live the morning, not guaranteeing that they would reach the evening. And they would live the evening, not guaranteeing that they would reach the morning. But we live as if we're guaranteed forever. And that's why we struggle. But if we live with that mentality that if I'm not guaranteed tomorrow, what can I do for today? It's not going to matter to you what happens in Gaza next week if today is your last day. Your book is done. You're going to be in a different realm. All you're going to care about is what the book you presented to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he told us that even if the day of judgment is befalling and you're planting something as a small plant, to still plant it. And I want you to connect to this. What is going to happen to this plant if the day of judgment is befalling us? That plant is not going to exist, right? This world will cease to exist. So here the Prophet ﷺ is telling you to still plant something that's not going to exist. Why? For you. Because every good matters. Even if you don't get to live to see the fruits of it. So do not let what's happening in Gaza keep you from showing up. There's nothing more chaotic than Day of Judgment. And this week, some of, my clients have been sharing, what's the point of doing, going to school or finishing or, doing my work? I feel discouraged. I'm like, this is not the time to not show up and do the good or feel hopeless in any good that we're doing. Or what's the point of me making dua? Someone asked me this recently. How is my dua going to make a difference? How is this genocide going to end? How is this going to, You know who asked this? Ibrahim alayhi salam. After he finished structuring the Kaaba, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commanded him to call the people to Hajj. And Ibrahim alayhi salam, imagine, he finished structuring the Kaaba with his son. And he's looking around, there's nobody around him. And he asked Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, oh Allah, how? Again, the how. How will my voice reach all those people? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told him, your job or your responsibility is only to call the people to Hajj. And I will take care of how it reaches the people. Until this very day, millions and millions of people answer that call that Ibrahim first made and go to Hajj. If Ibrahim alayhi salam did not do that good because he couldn't understand the how, we wouldn't be where we're at today. But that's what it means to answer Allah's command, even if you don't see your whole path. That's what it means to show up sincerely for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and do the good that you have to do, even if you don't get to live to see the results in your lifetime. It has meaning and value with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, even if you don't get to witness it. And that's what existential psychology actually teaches. Meaning. When they say that suffering is when you cannot derive meaning from your experiences. What is meaning? It's a value of significance, a truth of significance, Everything Islam teaches us is about us giving us meaning. You get a prick of a thorn, fatigue, sorrow, as the hadith says. It is an expiation of your sins. You die a martyr, you go to Jannah. You lose a loved one, you lose a child, that child is waiting for you. You go through any pain, Allah makes up for it. You go through injustice, Allah is the most just. Everything Islam teaches us that is designed to give us meaning throughout our path in this world. So we do not lose hope. We are an ummah of hope. We are not the ummah of hopelessness. We're an ummah of I will do good even if I can't see the results. I will still show up and make dua even though I don't know how Allah is going to answer. For my own life and for Palestine. So I end by reminding you to take this time while we're witnessing all of this, to make sure that you come out of it stronger. To make sure that it doesn't, because what's going to happen is going to pass, inshallah. Nothing lasts forever. And this genocide, inshallah, will pass. No injustice lasts forever. But will you be different? Will you come out of this stronger, closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Will you come out of this answering Allah's call, obeying His commands in a way that you didn't before? جزاكم الله خير. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه.